I thought I was marrying the love of my life. We had been together for 4 years, and when he finally proposed, I was over the moon. Like any excited bride-to-be, I started planning our wedding, setting aside every spare dollar to make the day as special as possible. I had been saving for years, long before I even met my fiancé, because I wanted to have the wedding of my dreams. But just as everything was coming together, his mother pulled me aside with a shocking demand, one that left me completely speechless. "You should transfer the wedding fund to my son. He's the man, after all, he should be in control of the money." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. But when I saw the cold seriousness in her eyes, I realized she wasn't kidding. She expected me to hand over the money I had worked for, to her son, because that's how things should be in a marriage. I looked at my fiancé, expecting him to laugh it off or shut her down immediately. Instead, he just sat there in silence. That's when I knew I had a serious problem. Was I really about to sign over everything to my future mother-in-law's golden boy? Or was this the moment I realized I was making the biggest mistake of my life? What happened next shocked me. Let me take you back to where this all started. I met my fiancé, Jake, at a work event 4 years ago. He was charming, funny, and seemed like the kind of guy who had his life together. We clicked instantly, and within a few months, we were inseparable. He had a steady job, treated me well, and for the most part, seemed like a kind and supportive partner. But there was one thing that always stood out: his relationship with his mother. From the beginning, it was obvious that his mother, Linda, had an unusual amount of influence over him. She wasn't just an involved parent, she was controlling. At first, I brushed it off as normal motherly concern. After all, some moms are just protective, right? But the more I got to know them, the more I realized that Linda didn't just have an opinion on Jake's life, she controlled it. Whenever we made plans together, Jake had to check with his mom first. If we wanted to take a weekend trip, he needed her approval. Even when he moved into my apartment, she had to come over and inspect the place first. She was constantly calling him, asking about our relationship, making little passive-aggressive comments about me, and reminding him that he needed to put his family first. I tried not to let it bother me. I loved Jake, and I thought, this is just how some families are. But looking back now, I can see the red flags waving right in my face. Before I even met Jake, I had been saving for my wedding. I always knew I wanted a beautiful, well-planned wedding, and I didn't want to depend on anyone else to make it happen. So, for years, I worked hard, lived frugally, and put away money specifically for that purpose. By the time Jake proposed, I had saved around $25,000. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was enough to give us a solid start for a beautiful yet reasonable wedding. When we got engaged, I assumed we'd both contribute to the wedding fund. But as time went on, I started noticing something strange. Jake never talked about his contribution. I'd bring up budgeting, asking things like, "How much do you want to put toward the wedding?" or "What's our total budget going to be?" And he'd always deflect. "Oh, let's talk about it later. I think we should just focus on what you've saved first. My mom said she might help out, so let's see what she offers." It didn't sit right with me, but I was still in that naive, love-blinded phase where I convinced myself that everything would work out. Looking back, there were so many warning signs. Jake never made financial decisions without consulting his mother. I should have realized then that our wedding budget wouldn't be our decision, it would be hers. Linda made passive-aggressive comments about financial responsibility in marriage. She once said to me, "A good wife lets her husband take care of everything." That's how marriages last. Jake seemed uncomfortable whenever we talked about money. He avoided the subject, especially when it came to contributing his own funds. But the biggest red flag? About a month before his mom made her demand, she made a comment that, in hindsight, should have sent me running. We were at dinner, discussing wedding venues, when Linda casually said, "Well, since you're marrying my son, it only makes sense that your money becomes his money, right? That's how it works in a real marriage." I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. But now? I know she meant every word, and soon, she was about to put that belief into action, by demanding I hand over my entire wedding fund. What happened next was worse than I ever imagined. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Jake and I had gone to his parents' house for what I assumed was a casual lunch. His mom had invited us over, saying she wanted to talk about some important wedding details. I figured she wanted to discuss guest lists or venue options, normal things. I had no idea that I was about to be ambushed. We sat in their perfectly decorated living room, sipping tea, when Linda suddenly leaned forward and clasped her hands together, looking at me with that fake, overly sweet smile I had come to recognize as a bad sign. "So," she started, "Jake told me that you've been saving quite a bit of money for the wedding. That's so responsible of you, sweetheart." It's wonderful to see a young woman who knows how to handle finances properly. I nodded, unsure where this was going. Yeah, I've been saving for a while now. I just wanted to make sure we had enough to have a nice wedding without stressing over money. She tilted her head and gave a small chuckle, like I was some silly little girl. Exactly. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation. You see, in a marriage, financial responsibility should fall on the man. Jake is going to be your husband, and he should be the one managing the money. It's just how things should be done. I felt my stomach drop. She continued, so, I think it would be best if you transferred the wedding fund into Jake's account. That way, he can handle all the wedding expenses, and you won't have to worry about it. I blinked. Was she serious? I turned to Jake, expecting him to shut this down immediately. But instead, he just sat there, avoiding eye contact. His jaw was tense, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jake? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. You don't actually think that's necessary, right? He exhaled, still looking anywhere but at me. Then he muttered, I mean, it does make sense. My mom just thinks it'll be easier if I handle the money. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Easier? How was this supposed to make anything easier? I turned back to Linda. I don't understand. This is money I saved. Why would I need to transfer it to Jake? Her smile faltered slightly, as if she couldn't believe I was actually questioning her. Because that's what a wife does, dear. She trusts her husband to take care of things. If you're planning on marrying my son, then you need to start acting like a wife. I stared at her, then at Jake, waiting for him to say something, anything. Silence. And that's when I realized he agreed with her. He wasn't going to stand up for me. He wasn't going to tell his mother that her request was ridiculous. He was just going to sit there and let her steamroll over me. And that's when I snapped. No. Linda's eyes widened. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not transferring anything. This isn't Jake's money. This is my money. I worked for it. I saved it. And I don't owe anyone an explanation for what I do with it. I could feel my heart pounding as the words left my mouth, but I refused to back down. Linda scoffed and looked at Jake, as if expecting him to get me in line. When he didn't say anything, she leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, sweetheart. I understand that you're young and independent, but you need to understand that marriage is about trust. Do you not trust my son? This isn't about trust, Linda. This is about control. Jake finally spoke up. Not to defend me, but to defend his mother. Come on, babe. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. I felt my hands shake with anger. Overreacting? You're asking me to hand over thousands of dollars that I worked for, and I'm overreacting? Linda huffed, clearly losing patience. If you can't even make a small sacrifice like this for my son, how do you expect this marriage to last? That was it. That was the moment I realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about the wedding fund. This was a test. A test to see if I would fall in line, if I would let Jake and his mother dictate our marriage, and I had just given them the wrong answer. I took a deep breath, looked Jake in the eye, and said, if you really think that giving you control over my money is what makes a marriage work, then maybe we shouldn't be getting married at all. The room went dead silent. Jake's face paled. Linda gasped, horrified that I had dared to question the marriage itself. You don't mean that, Jake said quickly, his voice shaking. I stood up. I do. Linda shook her head, laughing bitterly. You'll regret this. No man wants to marry a woman who won't submit to him. I grabbed my purse and turned to Jake. And I don't want to marry a man who needs his mommy to control his life. Then I walked out. As I drove away, my phone started blowing up with texts from Jake, his mother, and even some of his family members. They were all telling me I was overreacting, being dramatic, and ruining the relationship over nothing. But I knew better. This wasn't nothing. This was my wake-up call, and what happened next sealed the deal. As soon as I left Jake's parents' house, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First, it was Jake. Then it was his mom. Then it was his sister, his aunt, his cousin, and even his best friend, all telling me the same thing. You're overreacting. You're being selfish. Jake loves you, and you're throwing everything away over nothing. You need to apologize to Linda. Apologize? Apologize for what? For refusing to let them rob me? For not blindly handing over my savings? At first, I ignored all the calls and messages. But then, the guilt-tripping turned into outright threats. Linda sent a long message that nearly made me laugh out loud in disbelief. You don't understand how much you've hurt Jake. He's devastated. He thought you were his partner, his future. Do you really want to break his heart like this? You need to be a better woman, one who supports her husband. If you don't fix this, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And if you walk away, don't expect any of us to welcome you back. Oh no. Whatever will I do without her condescending, manipulative presence in my life? Then, just when I thought this circus couldn't get any worse, Jake showed up at my apartment. I barely had time to register the knocking before he started banging on my door. Babe, open up. We need to talk. I should have told him to leave, but I was still so confused, so angry, so heartbroken that I let him in. The moment he stepped inside, he launched into a speech about how I was misunderstanding everything. Look, my mom just wants what's best for us, he said. She wasn't trying to be controlling. She just knows how marriages work. She and my dad have been together for 30 years. Don't you think she knows more than we do? I folded my arms. So, what? You actually think I should have just handed over all my savings to you? He hesitated. That one tiny pause told me everything. I mean. He started, then sighed, rubbing his face. It would have made things easier, okay? You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Oh, so there it was. The truth. This wasn't about tradition, or marriage values, or financial trust. He just wanted access to my money, and the fact that I wasn't blindly obeying? That was the real problem. I stared at him, feeling something inside me just snap. Get out. His head jerked up. What? I said, get out. He looked genuinely stunned. Like he thought I was going to melt under the pressure, like I was just being dramatic and would eventually cave in. Babe, don't be like this. I love you. You love me? You love me, but you were willing to let your mother humiliate me? You love me, but you think it's totally fine to take my money and make decisions behind my back? He opened and closed his mouth, like he wanted to argue but couldn't figure out what to say. Finally, he sighed and muttered, "You'll regret this." And that was it. I walked to the door, held it open, and waited. After a few seconds, he finally walked out, and the moment the door shut behind him, I blocked his number. Now, I could have just moved on, taken the high road, and let karma do its thing. But no. 'Cause, as I later found out, Jake and his precious mommy weren't done yet. A week after I broke things off, I started getting messages from mutual friends. Apparently, Jake and Linda were spinning an entirely new story. According to them, I was a cold-hearted gold digger who didn't actually love Jake. I was too career-obsessed and cared more about my savings than my fiancé. I was paranoid and controlling and had trust issues that made me unfit for marriage. Oh. So that's how they wanted to play it? Fine. I decided that if they wanted to smear my reputation, I was going to make sure everyone knew the real story. I put together a very polite, very professional post on Facebook, thanking everyone for their concern and explaining what really happened. I included the exact words Linda said about giving my savings to Jake, the text messages I received afterward from his family trying to guilt-trip me, a gentle reminder that a healthy marriage should be built on mutual respect, not financial control. I didn't trash-talk anyone. I didn't make up lies. I just laid out the facts. And let's just say, people were not impressed with Jake and Linda. The backlash was brutal. Friends and extended family called them out for their manipulative behavior. Some even cut ties completely. Jake ended up deactivating his social media because he couldn't handle the heat. And Linda? Oh, she tried to play the victim, claiming I was ruining their family name. But guess what? No one bought it. Now, here's the best part. Remember that $25,000 wedding fund? Since I was no longer getting married, I decided to treat myself. I booked a 2-week vacation to Greece. I put some money into a savings account for future travels. And the rest? Well, let's just say I made some impulse purchases that brought me immense joy. And it felt amazing. Because instead of spending that money on a wedding with a manipulative man-child, I was using it to celebrate my freedom. Linda and Jake thought they were going to take my money and control my life. Instead, I walked away happier, wealthier, and with zero regrets. And the best part? Jake is still living with his mom. Guess she got her perfect son all to herself after all. It's been 6 months since I walked away from Jake and his controlling mother, and let me tell you, it was the best decision I ever made. The wedding, of course, was cancelled. I cut all contact with Jake and his family, and from what I've heard through mutual friends, things didn't exactly go well for him after our breakup. Apparently, Linda was furious that I had the nerve to disrespect her family by not just going along with her demands. She tried to convince Jake that I was a terrible, selfish woman, but instead of moving on and finding someone else, Jake just stayed home. Yes, you heard that right. At almost 30 years old, Jake moved back in with his mom. From what I've heard, he hasn't dated anyone seriously since I left. He lost a bunch of friends after they found out what really happened. Linda still treats him like a little boy, micromanaging his life. Honestly? I almost feel sorry for him. But then I remember that he was perfectly fine letting his mother manipulate me, and that feeling disappears real quick. As for me, I'm thriving. After the breakup, I focused on myself. I took that 2-week trip to Greece, and it was incredible. I picked up new hobbies and reconnected with old friends. I started dating again, but this time I made sure to look out for red flags. And most importantly, I finally realized my own worth. Looking back, I can't believe how many warning signs I ignored. If a man lets his mother control him, he is not ready for marriage. If someone makes you feel guilty for protecting your own money, run. If a partner won't stand up for you against their toxic family, they never will. Marriage is supposed to be about mutual respect, not about power and control. If someone truly loves you, they won't expect you to give up your independence. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a controlling mother-in-law or a partner who refused to set boundaries? What did you do? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more shocking real-life stories. Until next time, stay strong, and never let anyone tell you what to do with your own money.